Right.
Hello. Hi, Doug. Hi, Omari.
Hello, hello.
How,
Welcome back.
how do you?
Welcome back. Welcome back. And welcome back to all of our attendees. I fear the audience has dwindled a little bit. And I think that's maybe because of the appearances of the researchers are here now. So,
Go, don't go. We'll be brief.
but here we are. We wanted to at least do a little wrap up of what we've just heard. And some thank yous, of course, at the end, but a little wrap up, which it won't be long. It's 4:30. So, and it's going to be me and Doug and Omari kind of in conversation. We heard a lot, so we probably can't get to everything, but we probably have a few things we want to say. So if you don't mind, I'll start just a little bit from background, kind of our perspective from the lab and the center. So this is a program that's, being hosted by the Arts Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab. And this is a program at the Center for Cultural Affairs. And we have for a number of years been trying to figure out what is our role in understanding public engagement with arts and culture, very loosely sort of defined that question. And one of our major roles that we've landed on is that our role is to host these messy conversations. The one that we probably just saw, the one that we saw in the keynotes, the one that we saw in the workshop that preceded this virtual symposium that was in person, that many of you who are here online don't know about, but we had 2 days of researchers who are doing research on the topic of inequities in the arts and innovating institutions come together with our artist fellows, our DDCF, our Doris Duke Charitable Foundation artist fellows in an in-person workshop format to present, but also debate the research and to think about what lies ahead. So we've had a series of these messy conversations now about this topic, innovating institutions and inequities in the arts. And we did this in this particular way because we wanted to hear different perspectives. We wanted to hear the perspectives of the people who are at our workshop in early June and those that were here today, as well as those who will be continuing the conversation based on what they've heard. And why do we want to hear these perspectives? Well, we're kind of strong believers here at the AEI Lab and the CCA is that perspectives, and in particular, kind of diverse perspectives, is what can spark not only empathy, right, but also innovation. So the ability to see other people's viewpoints and perspective allows us to move forward and to figure out new ways to move forward. And I think we had a lot of perspectives presented today, and I don't want to comment on what those perspectives are because I don't think that's my role in where I sit right now as a researcher, as a director of this lab. But I do want to give recognition to the honesty that was put forth by so many of our panelists, so many of our keynoters, as well as our attendees. So the honesty about what their perspective is, as well as some of the constructive feedback that we heard. So I think we started our second panel with some partly constructive feedback to the keynoters panel that was, hey, from where I'm sitting, it's hard for me to understand what was just said and how that's relevant to my everyday life. And I thought that was a truly constructive piece of feedback that all of us that made me feel like we were going somewhere in the conversation. But the third thing I really wanted to recognize was maybe a problem, but also maybe just the reality of where we are and how these conversations happen, is that there are a lot of silos. So there are people who work within the arts sector in an administration role, within the role of as a creative, within the role as a thought leader, within the role as a researcher. And these people all have their own worlds. And they speak in these languages that are specific to their worlds. They speak to one another in these languages that are specific to their worlds. And they do things, they have actions that are very specific. Their behaviors are very specific to the worlds that they live in. And that is, I wanted to recognize that, because that seems to me to be one of the major kind of challenges we have, not only in this sector, but across a lot of different sectors and a lot of different issues we grapple with. In how do we work with the silos that we have where we sit, and are those silos something that we need to break down, or are those silos something that are actually necessary to thinking about innovating institutions? So I think I want to just sort of leave it at that, and then ask Doug or Omari to comment and provide what they've sort of heard today.
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. I'll take the baton at that point. And just to keep building on that, I want to say thanks to the speakers and the various people we've heard from today, partly because they do represent a lot of different vantage points and different positions in all of this. It's tricky to get together that diverse set of positions where you've got people who are sort of the academic side, you've got some of the thought leaders, you've got the arts administrators, you've got artists, you've got a bunch of people coming together for really important, vital conversations. I also want to put a little context on this to add to some of the process that's led us here, where this goes next, in that we will be distilling and editing and cleaning up this video piece for this whole afternoon's symposium and posting it up onto YouTube. We will also be doing some more less sort of gut reaction kind of responses and some more thoughtful digestion of all of this, and wrapping it all up into some summary reports and some video highlights in our Arts Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab. We'll be posting those things later on in the fall. So you'll be hearing about all those sorts of things that'll come out of this. We don't want this to be a one-off conversation where we just get a bunch of strange people together in a Zoom room and talk for an afternoon. We want this to be a step in the right direction of a much longer path, which we've heard a couple times this afternoon, that this is a lifetime journey or a multi-generational path we're on, and it needs to be. And so we are fully aware of that. We're fully intending for this to be part of our hopeful step forward, but part of a longer process. And it doesn't just end with this afternoon. We'd love it if this opened doors, helped make connections, opened ideas in our minds, and help move us all forward with that. And the last, maybe more substantive thing I'll say in my instant reflection on some of the things I heard this afternoon is to underscore the importance of major institutions and systems that exist well outside of or beyond the arts as a sector. That the arts world is, as a world unto itself, is very important and vibrant and vital, but it's also certainly influenced by broader systems, whether they're colonial and capitalist systems, whether it's sort of, we think about just the healthcare system or systems of labor or the tax systems. There's a lot of big, larger policy systems that in some ways act on the arts and affect the arts world as a first order issue. The arts can reform and refine how it does its own grant making and funding, for instance. But at the end of the day, perhaps some of the first order effects are going to be things that come out of the healthcare system that'll affect and define the arts. Or it's the impact of technological shifts that aren't necessarily born of artists, but are certainly affecting how artists live and thrive. Whether it's the rise of platforms and a platform economy or the attention economy, or however we want to refer to this, these are big issues, and a lot of them were touched on this afternoon in important ways. It's not, and I think the big theme to me of how we behave in these larger systems. We'll boycott Amazon after today. Good luck with that. And outside of that, what else do we do? These are really hard questions. And we don't get to choose the systems we're in sometimes, but we do get to choose how we operate within them. And I think that's a huge starting point and a call for some really good ideas about how we can operate in there. And I think it also helps flip things back around on some of the roles for artists, which I'll get to in 60 seconds. I really liked in the last session, this idea of recognizing that we've got a bunch of new roles and sort of multi-hyphenate sort of new roles. We use the word influencer as a household term as if that means something. And I couldn't have said that 10 years ago. The world is changing rapidly and our roles are changing rapidly, and perhaps far more rapidly than our institutions are. They're the outdated things right now. And how we adapt those or invent new ones to accommodate these new realities is the big question ahead of us. And in some ways, the big theme of innovating institutions. What do we do to keep up with the changing world? And we get to be multi-hyphenate and do all this partly because some institutions are better at accommodating that than others. And that's where activity is getting funneled for good or bad. There's some interesting tensions that arose in the conversations this afternoon involving things like information and data and trying to learn more, and at the same time concerns about the surveillance and privacy and the burdens of information. It gets pretty complicated in the real world. And I think recognizing those complexities is important for moving us forward. There's still challenges with limited resources, especially in the context of the sheer volume of people who want to be creative and want to be artists and can be and should be. And yet the resources are limited. They're not commensurate with that huge volume. How do we handle that? Where do we go forward with it? I love the expression about technology of radical imagination. I like the idea of reimagining what we think of with technology. It's not just zeros and ones or hardware. It's also our own internal technology. And that radical imagination, I think, is perhaps one of the most important technologies that the arts can bring to all of these conversations. And so with that, my last thoughts will be that I appreciate seeing artists described and positioned as being at the forefront of change and reform and new things. And that's a theme that came out this afternoon. That's a big role for artists in changing awareness and changing social priorities and changing how we see these things. That huge impact of artists is there with changing our imaginations and changing our views, but also not just about artists in that sense, but also artists as agents of change and agents within systems, and how they can affect and improve and move those systems forward is something that I'm excited to help be part of, providing a platform for those conversations. And to the benefit of the platform, the less I talk, the better. So please, Omari, go.
No, the more the both of you talk and the more that the AEI lab does and the center does, the better we all are. So, thanks for you all's work. Again, as I said earlier, just getting all this organized and pulling these folks together for what I thought was a really stimulating day. As a couple of my reflections, I would just say that, one, I just thought the keynotes were, the recorded keynotes were really wonderful, really tight, each very different from, if we had seen Michelle's, it would have also presented itself as very different from the others, but just really wonderful focus. There's like an ice cream truck going along and it's cute. But each with its own perspective and focus that was really rich, but also just highlighted the range of ways that people are thinking about all the different intersections: arts, technology, economies, capitalism, kind of civic imagination. And so that was really wonderful for me to see and experience. And I just feel a deep sense of appreciation that it's like captured, and that we can send those out, that we can refer back to those thoughts, because a lot of what they were kind of wrestling with and poking at in those keynotes are things that we need to spend more time with, because all of this is complex, there are no like obvious solutions, but really take some deep thinking and take the kind of connection between ideas to find new patterns that having those posted allows. So I'd say that. I also really did like the kind of focused perspective of the Midwest folks. We had certainly Detroit, Cleveland, pointing people out in the Midwest, Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, Twin Cities, I believe maybe Indianapolis, but it's just a good range of voices that that expressed complementary and differing opinions about this topic of inequities in the arts that I thought was really refreshing, fresh, and not necessarily balancing, but it was just nice that that group had a very different perspective. And so I appreciate the work that oh, Toledo also, there we go. that happened in that space to really be thoughtful about what happened in the keynotes and their kind of willingness to toss those ideas around and mix them with their own ideas to come up with some ideas that were just very stimulating and helpful. When I think, so beyond those appreciations of those two groupings, what stood out for me, and Joanna, it's a little bit easier for me to talk about this than you all, just because of the relationship that we're in. Somebody's putting a political thing on my door. This whole systems work and what it means to tear down institutions or what it means to understand how they work and help them work better, or what it means to just assume that different change is happening that we can just support. I'm still thinking about Lauren's opening comments about, creators are doing things already. They're naturally coming up with new systems, new platforms, new spaces. It's happening. We just need to let it happen. And so there was I found myself feeling more optimistic as she was speaking, as opposed to feeling like, boy, we have to ground up everything. We have to start over in every way. But, Joanna, to your point and what you heard, I still did hear the call from the Midway folks that, oh, well, maybe we do need to completely reimagine some of these institutions. And so that kind of balance, those perspectives are something that I will hold on to from this. One of the conversations that, or one of the pieces that I wanted to dig in more to during our session was with the keynotes, was how they just continue to understand how they're using the institutions that they're in, using the privilege of those institutions, using the resource of those institutions to poke at, drive, explore positive change in the world, what they see as the opportunities. And that's a lingering curiosity, but institutions and systems was something that I'm holding on to from this. The second, and now they're 4, because 5 was going to be optimism, but I already covered that. The second was just how hard it is to be an artist. The world is changing so quickly. The way, the evolving nature of capitalism, the role of kind of big money in kind of framing the way that commerce develops, all of that just means that there's a lot for artists to keep up with. And as an individual doing it, I can completely see a lot of it being overwhelming. I can see only, in a process of triaging, focusing on only the most immediate and urgent needs, as opposed to feeling like one has bandwidth to get ahead of trends, to even spot bigger trends, which I felt like was emerging from the keynote panel, is this idea of kind of bigger movements. And so, I do wonder, and also this idea that artists are so central to kind of ideas about world building and pointing toward kind of liberated futures where people are really enjoying life that is balanced, that's about more than just kind of an industrial kind of work commitment. And it just makes me want to continue to listen to folks like our cultural affairs advisory committee colleague, Laura Zabel at Springboard for the Arts, who's kind of pretty laser focused on artists. It makes me wonder what you all are going to do and continue to explore around artist involved economies and how folks make a living in those spaces. But I just very clearly got that it is still very difficult to be an artist where it shouldn't be, because of the values that they bring to our communities. Speaking of the values that they bring to our communities, this idea of community is my third thing. was also reinforced, and just how important networks are in allowing new ideas to emerge, in kind of sharing knowledge, in being not isolated and feeling like you're part of a movement that gives you momentum. That came through clear for me in all the talks. And then finally, I would say, if we think about how the work is powered and funding and resources, I was just reminded about the National Endowment for the Arts. And when we're talking about work that's happening outside of the just like across the country, outside of kind of centers that have access to lots of institutional philanthropy, the National Endowment for the Arts really exists as still a go-to resource, and it's also a federal government bureaucracy. And it just is fascinating, the change that people are wanting and the way that philanthropy happens in the country, what people are asking of that agency, the opportunity that agency has to lead, and the way that people get to understand its possibilities. I say that partly as the Arts Endowment being the funder of the AEI lab as one of the research labs. I'm thinking about, I can't remember whose call it was for better research and better access to data around the country, and the potential for an agency like that to do it. So they're doing wonderful work. It just continued to make me think about their role in the ecosystem as folks who are who have a mandate to get to all parts of the country and be thinking pretty holistically when it comes to the national arts and culture field. So overall, I thought it was a really wonderful day. I was going to say morning. It was, I think for everybody except for Sarah, who was calling in from Hawaii, it's been morning and afternoon. And I want to thank my Culture Source colleagues, Sarah and Kaylee, for helping out and being great pals in this too.
So both Doug and Omari, you talk a lot about change, and obviously the theme of this conference is innovating institutions. So while we talked a lot about inequities in both this symposium and the workshop, we talked a lot, I think, more here about the innovation portion of the theme of the conference. And I guess the thing that kept on coming up in my mind throughout the two panels today was the speed of change. And maybe depending on where we are, and what I mean by that is what age we are, what our background and experiences are, where we work, where we live, the speed of change is quite different, right? So I keep on going back to that book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he sort of talks about there are sort of two ways that a person thinks, and I'm going to sort of completely butcher the thesis of his book. But that being said, there's sort of two systems. One is this instinctive system, right? So, and then the other one is sort of this more deliberate, slower system. And different types of decisions we make and different things that happen fit in either system. And I keep on thinking right now, this topic of what do we do about inequities in the arts feels like a thing that we are operating with in system one, this instinctive way that we're making change, et cetera. And it's like we're pushing up against a force and nothing's happening. But maybe another way to think about it is that it is this slow, deliberate, incremental system. And actually, we have evidence sort of for how that system is already kind of playing out, or how the systemic change is already playing out. There are so many things, I think, in our lives that we think, I'm pushing and pushing and pushing against, and then one day we wake up and it's different. And I want to know, and I'm not saying this has happened, but I want to know whether or not there are things that we can wake up today and say, 2 years ago, I would have never said this was the case, but today that has happened because we kept on saying it, we kept on pushing, and then it became as it is. And I guess I want to put out there that change just happens in these various ways. And I kept on going back and forth between system 1 and system 2, or fast and fast and slow. Is that a fast change or is that a slow change? And does it have to be a fast change, or will it work better if it's a slow change? And again, I don't have the answer, but I think sort of thinking about that in terms of where do we go next seems to help me kind of heuristically, at least about thinking what outcomes might be.
Yeah, and I think let's keep our eye on the ball of those changes that we're not necessarily pushing for, but that we wake up one day and that change happened. And maybe it's the OnlyFans example, which kudos for that for getting brought up in a previous panel. Didn't see that coming. But it's these kinds of radical changes that they're disruptive. These disruptive technologies come along and often disrupt in ways we weren't anticipating or intending, and they come at us from off stage. And to be aware or be as mindful of that stuff as we can, so that we can manage it and compensate for it, or if it's a very positive change, ride that and scale it. But those are all really, these are interesting parts to this.
Yeah.
And I would say, Joanna, in response to what you were saying, I really do trust emergence. And I trust that, and I think one of the neat things about this symposium is that it just showed even a small number of people, but is an example of the range of people, all very different across the country, that are doing their part to push different ways of thinking, to push new ways of working, explore them. And all of that is going to come together and look like a movement when we look in bigger chunks. But I think from my perspective, I'm really trusting that all of those small activities equal one bigger activity that we'll see when we get the different perspective of being in the future and time. And again, I think that was what I was trying to get at about my excitement about this idea of community and what it means for so much interconnectedness, so much pulling people into the room who weren't in the room, because it's that and I think that's kind of slow work, but I think that's the work that's going to get us to a better place. Fast changes can be novel, and I think there's something interesting when there's fast change and you just have to immediately come up with new systems. But I think there's a certain amount of change that is sturdier, that is slower.
Yeah.
The grassroots, the sort of the groundswell change, and what, as the academic hat would use the big overpriced word of decentralized. But these more decentralized, diffuse changes, when they're coming at you and they're pervasive and they're sort of everywhere, those are going to be much more fundamental, big scale changes than whatever we might have put in 2 years ago, and that'll get undone at the next midterms. Like, I get nervous about any political policy-based solutions, in part, and anything the NEA would do or not do, in part because of the fickle winds of change that way. And those sort of top-down ones don't have the stability and robustness and the large-scale foundation that the grassroots and groundswell kind of change happens. And you only get that, not so much from the top down, but it's from the bottom up. You got to work on the bottom. You've got to be everywhere. You've got to be in the Midwest. You've got to be in the rural areas. You've got to be everywhere and be able to have the change manifest or get glommed onto or affect at all of those levels. And that's where, speaking from an ivory tower, that's not it. It's not going to come from an ivory tower. It's going to maybe come out of it, but it's only going to be percolating up to be the real big, durable change.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to keep everyone. This was basically a demonstration of the sort of every now and then Omari, Doug, and I get the opportunity to have a Zoom chat with one another and talk. And I sort of feel a little bit guilty that, or let's say very privileged that I was able to do this in front of an audience of people, because these chats are always so informative to me. But I want to just say thank you, Omari and Doug, of course, for being partners in this collaboration between the AEI Lab and Culture Source. And then thank you again to our audience members and our attendees. We have had really a great day, and the attendance and engagement from all of you is striking, as not surprisingly. Thank you to our keynoters and our panelists. We could not have done this without you, and we are always just very shocked when you say yes to our invitation to come to these things. So thank you for being there for us. And obviously, thank you to our O'Neill staff again for being behind the scenes and making this run so nicely. Nikki, Julia, Suri, Ariel. And then of course, thank you to Culture Source, Omar, your organization that is just so, again, easy to work with and just so lovely to work with. Sarah, it just, again, so lovely. And then finally, thank you. Doug, why don't you say our last thank yous to our big sponsors?
Our Student Charitable Foundation. Thank you to our Student Foundation for helping make this, give us resources and be an ardent supporter of these conversations and be someone who wants to help give that platform and give voice and hopefully give ears to all these people. And thanks to the National Endowment for the Arts also for helping fund our Arts Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab and keep those momentum going. So thank you to everybody. And I'll make one quick final plug. Go watch those pre-recorded keynoters and look for more stuff from us as we put out the recordings of this later.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you all.
Right. Yeah, reception is down the hall in the grand ballroom. All right.